Our next speaker has traveled all the way from London to Granö, and this is not only her first visit in Sweden, but definitely also her first visit in Granö. I hope she enjoys it. I think she does. Well, she leads the nature team at the Green Finance Institute, where she works to channel private investment into nature-based solutions and nature restoration. And I'm talking about Helen Avery. Welcome. Very warm welcome to step up on the stage. Yes. And before you joined the institute, you were a sustainable finance editor at Euromoney magazine in New York. So you're a journalist from background. And we're absolutely delighted to have you here in Granö. And welcome to tell us more about your work.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me. As I say, it is my first time in Sweden. I'm thrilled to be here. It's a wonderful place and the food is amazing. So I thought I would just walk you through how we approach how you mobilise private sector investment into nature restoration. I don't think it will be things you haven't thought of, but I do feel, and the reason I left journalism and joined GFI, as we call ourselves, was because I really do think it's quite a unique approach. And then I'll walk through some of the models that we've seen that are working around the world. And then hopefully what I'd love to hear from you is, and it doesn't have to be straight after, but throughout the day, I'd love to sort of have a conversation around how do you see this relevant in Sweden? Because my ambition really is here to support as much as I can and not just see this as a day of speaking, but something we can take on afterwards and continue the conversation. So very simple, our mission is to unlock private sector investment into nature restoration, nature-based solutions. We were set up in 2019 by the UK government, actually. They were wanting, they had a whole task force set up to see how they could get the private sector to help deliver on the UK's net zero targets that expanded into nature positive targets, and wanted a vehicle that was entirely neutral that could work with academia and corporates and the finance sector and government and understand what the barriers are, and then develop solutions with all those people, be they policy levers or mechanisms, and move things forward. So there's a lot of words on this slide, but I wanted to sort of show where we see, specifically for nature, the path to ultimately what many people think is the most important thing. I'm not sure I agree, and that's that institutional investment, hundreds of billions of dollars or pounds or whatever it is, going into nature positive solutions and investments. And what has been a real pleasure sort of spending time here is that I don't think you're starting at the end, and most people do. Most people say, right, we've got a national target this end, or an international target like the Global Biodiversity Framework, or we've got a national target for like an NDC or our NbSAP, our National Biodiversity Strategic and Action Plan that we've all had to submit into the Global Biodiversity Framework. And okay, so how are we going to get hundreds of billions moving? Let's ask the pension funds. And then the pension funds say, I have no idea what you're talking about. What on earth are we going to invest in? And then it gets locked up, the conversation. And we've seen this for the last 5 years. And what people aren't taking into account is that all this stuff in the middle kind of needs to happen, although it's a linear process, as I've laid it out here, in tandem, really. It all has to happen at the same time. So what we do at GFI is really work in this middle bit, which I'll try not to block. But essentially, you start with your national goal, and we even think regional goals are relevant because biodiversity is so different in different areas. In the UK, we have local nature strategies that most local governments will develop. And then government often says, right, we're done. We've told you what the goals are, and I'm sure the money will just flow. And we say, actually, no, that's not going to happen at all. What you then need is to kind of create this signalling, back some frameworks that encourage private sector investment. You might set targets for the mobilisation of private sector investment. You might say this sector needs to contribute this sector needs to contribute that towards our national nature targets. backing frameworks that support the private sector in understanding what the impacts and dependencies are on nature. So that's things like the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures and transition pathways. Something we're working on with WWF in the UK is the development of those sectoral pathways that basically say, we've got these nature targets through our Environment Act. What do we expect the agricultural sector to contribute, and the water sector and the energy sector? Because a lot of what we hear from businesses in the UK is they say, yeah, we're up for it, but if we're not pushed and you don't tell us what to do, what can we do? We go to our CFO and say we're going to do something, and the CFO goes back and says, no, we're not. So that needs to be done. And as I mentioned yesterday, we host the global TNFD and then the UK programme for the TNFD, which is about 600 businesses that we're trying to work through that process. Then it's about designing the political and finance enablers. So it's exploring, should compliance markets work? Those are regulatory compensation markets where you're saying, in the UK, again, we have biodiversity net gain, where property developers have to offset whatever damage they're doing and add an extra 10%. Is that something you can do for other sectors, for example? Are there financial incentives, including tax cuts? So they've introduced some changes in tax law for farmers so that they can move into natural capital markets like nature-based carbon and be taxed the same as if they were delivering food production. So it's those kinds of things. How do we incentivize that supply and demand side? So in this case, we'd be talking about forest owners as the supply and corporates as the demand, as the buyers of credits or whatever it is, the nature-based solution or ecosystem service they're buying from that farmer. How do you encourage both through financial incentives? And then voluntary market development, is that a mechanism that government can sort of be involved in or fund in some way to get that going? Then designing the non-political, non-finance enablers, that's all your market infrastructure, standards, governance, MRV, capacity. And we start to move out of government now, away from the blue and into sort of businesses setting themselves up as their own to do biodiversity credits and standards. But often they also need some government funding and some guidance from government on how those should be structured. Excuse me. And then this is a bit we really play into. We work a lot with government throughout this whole process and all these different cross-sector actors. But then it's really about developing the pipeline. So it's testing and evidencing, which is, we've heard about a little bit, what the models that actually bring together that demand and supply. So that's the need there is technical assistance facilities. In the UK, government set up what was called investment readiness funds. They're 15 million across Scotland and England. Thank you so much. I've got mine there. Thank you. In grant funding for farmers, and in your case, it would be forest owners, to basically see what they can sell. So that's £100,000 went to multiple farmers and farmer groups, £150,000 in some cases, that they could sit down and say, okay, are biodiversity credits an option? We didn't have voluntary biodiversity credits in the mix for our investment readiness funds. They were set up 4 years ago. We helped assess them and advise the government on them. But they were thinking, okay, is nature-based carbon an option for me as a farmer? Is biodiversity net gain going to be an option for me? How do I build my business case? And we've been very methodical about helping farmers think through every part of that journey. Like, is it right for you? What do you want from your land? Could you even find a buyer if that was the case? If so, how do you build the contracts and what kind of money are you going to need? What should your baseline be? And I think that has been super, super helpful because while we've got stuck at the demand side, we've thought really heavily in the UK about how you get the supply side through. What we haven't done is build the demand on the other end. So now we have about 250 projects in the UK of many hundreds more of farmers who've come together and have said, we've worked out our business case, we've done our baselining, we're ready to sell something, but there's no one to buy it. That sounds quite negative, but what it has meant is that we've really upskilled everyone on what nature markets are in the UK. Everyone understands it, farmers are on board, and therefore we're not seeing some of the reactions that we're seeing, for example, in the Netherlands, where farmers are protesting about the possibility that they're going to have to start working with the private sector. And then knowledge sharing, really, really important. Moving on, and I'll start to speed up because there's a lot to get through today, but it's around, once you've found models that work, replicating and scaling them. And they need Pathfinder funding that often comes from philanthropy, and that's kind of like 300,000 to drop into another sector, to drop into another region, and just replicate and scale and see if it works. And this is the work that we do with UNEP-FI and UNDP Biofin in countries around the world. We've identified models. We're trying to replicate and scale them so we can just move everything a bit faster. I'm going to take some water, thank you. And I'll show you some models that we think just can be replicated and scaled. And it's designing the financial model, and this is where it starts to come into the finance side, in that a lot of these projects will be bilateral agreements or multilateral agreements between a corporate or several corporates paying landowners to make changes, deliver credits, whatever it's going to be, and those contracts happen between them. And the money from the corporates will pay for the interventions that the landowners are going to make, whether it's tree planting or soil health improvement. In some cases, it's so big that actually you need upfront money going in at the beginning that we paid back by the corporate repayments over time with some margin in there for a return. And again, that's a bit sticky at the moment because actually the prices of credits aren't really high enough for a bit of a margin in between. So we're thinking about how do we design the financial models. We work a lot with banks because most of the products tend to be lending and debt. And what we really need then is this first of a kind capital that can take sort of, a 4%, perhaps looking for 4% investment rate, happy to go in for 10 years. And that's a huge gap we have in the UK. We have a development bank that doesn't do that, unfortunately. But you really do need your like a government fund or a philanthropic organisation who's going to step in and say, we'll be that first loss, the guarantee, we'll take the lower return and allow others to take the high return. And then we move into the bit that everyone talks about mainly at the big COPs, is how do we move hundreds of billions of dollars. This bit in the middle is the hardest bit, and it feels like actually from the conversation I had yesterday, it's the bit that everyone here is thinking about and working on, which was really pleasing to me because often people say, what do you mean we're not talking to pension funds? I'm like, not for quite some time. So yeah, I say these are the biggest where the biggest pieces are globally that I think we all need to work. It's the same in every country that we're in, and I say this is where we work. So in terms of models and mechanisms, I'm not going to linger on these because we can talk about them a bit later, but in terms of markets, you've got your compliance markets, mitigation banking. We're seeing that work in the USA. Obviously, we've got biodiversity net gain in UK, which has got off to a rocky start. Hopefully we'll get there. There are water markets and nutrient markets, but they're government markets, and therefore they should work in theory because they're demanding. The demand driver is built into the regulation. And then voluntary markets, we've got multiple in the UK. We are looking at voluntary biodiversity credit markets as well, built off the biodiversity net gain metric. But the challenge is they're voluntary. So there's no demand driver at present. So we're just starting some work with UK corporates to understand, when are you going to start buying nature-based carbon? Why aren't you buying it from the UK? Is it a price issue? Can we get government to put on a price floor or some sort of guarantee so that it can help us sell nature-based carbon into UK corporates? But the feedback we have is they don't feel the pressure yet. Their CFO is sort of saying to them, not quite yet, maybe in 3 years. So can we show that the price is going to shoot up, therefore they should buy now? We don't know. These are conversations we're going to have. Collective action models, which I'll talk through, and that's really sort of companies recognising that they are under some risk from climate and nature degradation, and that they're worried about their business operations, they're worried about their workforce getting to work from flood, they're worried about the supply chains due to water shortage or drought, and we're seeing that start to move. That's probably the biggest change we've seen in the last year of corporates saying, yeah, we're in now, but it's about business resilience. You don't even have to talk to us about nature. What we care about is what we say to our CFO, which is this is about our business growth and our competitiveness, and we just have to invest in a whole bunch of nature-based solutions. And some companies are paying land managers to meet reporting standards. And then we've got the traditional investment models like low-rate loans to farmers to transition, sustainable ag or forestry funds. How am I doing on time? Can I just ask? Oh, great. Thank you. So I won't walk through this in detail because I've got quite a few that I'd like to sort of share with you just to get the cogs going, really, to see if anything sticks that you think could be replicated in Sweden within forestry. Biodiversity net gain, as I mentioned, it's a government compliance market. Its aim was to reduce negative impacts of development. It's not really about increasing biodiversity, actually. We've kind of shoehorned it into that thinking. It's anticipated to move about 200 million a year into habitat banks. It's actually only moved about 300,000, and it's been running a year. And there's all sorts of loopholes that property developers can get through, like we're doing all our biodiversity net gain on site, which of course we know might not be permanent. People typically don't like a lot of marshy areas around their homes with mosquitoes, and people worry about bees stinging their children in England. So we're worried that if you do that work on site, it's just not going to last. It had supportive funding through the investment readiness funds, but the challenges are it's complex. It took 10 years to set this up. It's quite time consuming as you think about the different processes and who has to sign off, like local planning authorities. It could have just been a tax, perhaps, and then these on-site, off-site rules. This one I think is super interesting. It's called Landscape Enterprise Networks. It operates across the Europe, And this is essentially what I was mentioning, where you've got businesses in the agri-food sector, Nestle, Diageo, PepsiCo, Purina, teaming up with water utilities, actually, who are worried about what's happening on farms. For some of them, they're worried about their supply chain. Some are worried about what consumers think. And water companies are worried about the amount of nutrients that are coming off of that land and into the water system that they're having to pay to clean up. So they come together on a landscape scale and say, okay, we'll pay these farmers to hit certain targets. For some of them, they're looking at scope 3 targets as well to improve that supply chain. And they'll do things like regen ag, water quality improvement, water storage improvements, soil health improvements. And Lens provides a model that gets the money from those collective of corporates out to the individual farmers on an annual trade basis. It's a small amount of money they've moved to date, 45 million, but it's doubling every year. So we expect this model to actually start to take off. And you could expand this model to things like bringing in infrastructure companies who also are worried about a landscape. Or they might be worried about flooding on the roads or flooding on the rail. Some of the energy companies are worried about water shortage and cooling, and they could collectively pay. And the reason this kind of works a lot better, and a lot of the businesses are starting to say we need more of this, is because, one, it lowers the cost if they're working together, and two, it lowers the risk of them going out there publicly and saying we're paying farmers. At least they're sort of sheltered with a bit of air cover when it's multiple corporates coming together. Rimba Collective, bit different. So this is payments from companies for sustainability claims. So again, all your big names are in this one, and it was born out of the Responsible Palm Oil the Roundtable for Sustainable Palm Oil. And ultimately, it's a mechanism that allows businesses to come together and pay for forest protection, conservation, peatland restoration, improved biodiversity, improved livelihoods of local communities in land adjacent to or as part of the supply chain, value chain of palm oil. And they're looking to expand that across fashion. That's aiming to move 1 billion over 30 years, obviously because the landscape scales involved in this are far bigger than in Europe. It's just huge tracts of lands across Papua New Guinea and Indonesia and Malaysia and the Philippines. And then what this allows businesses to do is report on sort of claim the sort of sustainability actions that they're doing, because it's all aligned with the responsible sustainable palm oil sort of KPIs and standard. And then I think this is the final. Oh no, this is the final one. Blue Alliance, a very different model. Blue Alliance. The work with BNP Paribas and UBS Optimus Foundations in the Philippines, Indonesia and Tanzania. But essentially what they do is they go in, say to a government, you've got marine protected areas, and I think something like 90% of marine protected areas are just paper parks. They are not protected all over the world. The UK is, I think, nearly all of them, just aren't having any protection at all. So they go into governments and say, we'll help you police the marine protected areas. And what we're going to do in return is build local economies. So we'll build businesses in those regions that are, I'm just going to make this up, things like materials from seaweed or sustainable fisheries or a reduction in plastic packaging. We'll build them in those areas, and a percentage of their profits goes back into paying the foundation to help patrol with the local government the seas and make sure that those areas really are protected. It's a super cool model. It took its inspiration from things like ecotourism models in Africa. But it's the only one I know that's actually having a real impact on marine protected areas. Debt for nature swaps, I don't know if you know much about them, but there's some question around their efficacy. So a really nice model. It doesn't require sort of big business in the mix. The reason they work for BNP Paribas is BNP Paribas will give them a loan for 10 years at a lower rate to offer to these businesses as they get started. And then some forest models, I won't go into too much detail, but I can do. Obviously, I don't know if you know about the Forest Resilience Bond. That's a bond to protect against fire in California, where various businesses pay in and local governments pay in to manage the forests in a sustainable way that reduces fire risk and therefore lowers the cost down the line of that fire when it occurs. Obviously, more than ever, that's being tested. I won't touch on Responsible Commodities Facility, it's quite complex, but the Tropical Asia Forest Fund is a sustainable forestry fund, but it has a tranche of impact investment. So some impact investors have come in and said, you know what, if you can raise 150 million or 200 million from institutional investors, if we come in and take a lower risk, so their return goes up, take a higher risk. If their return goes up, we'll do that. So there's a tranche where impact investors take 4 to 8%, and that allows institutional investors to come in and take 12%. So that's a really neat model, and I don't know why we're not doing that more. Again, it requires investors like philanthropic foundations to say we're going to put some of our endowment money in. Did I just get a signal? 2 minutes, sorry. SLM Silver Fund is one I would love to talk to some of you about over lunch, I think. Trees for Life is a UK one where it's planting trees and 30% of the profits go back to the community, and they're selling carbon for about $100 to $150 a tonne, which is big. And that's because their narrative is they have a rewilding centre, it's all in Gaelic. It's about restoring the community back to nature. That's a really successful model. So I'll just wrap up. Yeah, I mean, in summary, the challenges are mainly the demand drivers. We can figure out the supply. People are willing if they're going to get paid to make changes. But if we do not have the demand push on businesses to buy any of this stuff or pay for any of this stuff, then we're going to end up not moving anything. And that's really where we focus now globally with that global program. That scoping and pathfinder funding is essential. Where does it come from? We're all struggling with philanthropic organisations at the moment because of the US government and some of the decisions made there. Patient upfront capital for that initial upfront investment. We need the standardisation of KPIs. All these projects have different KPIs. Wouldn't it be great if they all came under some sort of umbrella that was building towards biodiversity credits, sort of feeding in all the information they're having back into a bigger global standard? Some projects, there's a lack of additionality. Intact landscapes is our wicked problem. We're having a big session at LCOR, London Climate Action Week, to sort of see what do you do about projects, forests that are already standing with no additionality, and then how do we get to scale? So thanks, Malin. I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Well,
do you want me to go and sit down?
No. We have time for questions. This is for to check the questions from the online participants, not to check my emails. Well, no questions yet, but you're welcome with your questions. Thank you for a very interesting and very substantial presentation. Yeah, so you have so much experience and so many examples. I wonder, I mean, you said several times that the demand side is a challenge, and I just wonder how do you get companies to recognize the value of nature investments? Well,
they're all so different. So what used to happen is we thought businesses really cared about nature and the environment, and then I think we realised that when the Trump administration got in and everything got rolled back, that actually that wasn't very true. It was a bit of a. Now I think we can talk more honestly, and what they really care about is profit, which I think we all knew. But maybe we kidded ourselves that they were driven by a different motivation. I'm not saying they're bad people, absolutely not. I'm just saying there's a motivation for business. So now we go into business and don't really talk about nature. We kind of say, what's your problem? And some might say it's consumers, some say it's employee retention. A lot of them are saying we're worried about our business operational risk and resilience. But that only works in a region where they have acute climate and nature pressures. Like in some parts of England, there isn't that pressure for another 20 years. And so it's no point going to those businesses and saying, you should be paying to up the water table. They're going to say, well, we've done our modelling, it's not relevant. So it's really about going in and saying what's most relevant to each business, which I know sounds time consuming, but some of the easiest bits is you map out a country and say, here's the climate nature pressure, where are the economic drivers around that, who's pulling from supply chains there, who's got operations there, and then start with that. Or if you happen to know a very pioneering company who does have a warm and cuddly heart with their CEO, they can normally convince the CFO to move around.
Yeah.
So, but that's really it. Or regulation.
Yeah. Any questions? And maybe you already answered this question, but what would be like your favorite model for mobilizing capital from the private sector to nature? What is like the trick, the key trick? No, it's not that simple. I understand that, but
my favorite model. I think the business resilience one, because it's really sustainable. They're worried about their operations. They're going to worry about them forever. It's not like they're going to pay for water storage, like farmers to improve soil health or foresters to plant more trees or whatever the solution is, and then walk away. That's their business forever. So I think it's very grounded in practicality. It works for businesses. It works for the supply side. That's probably the cleanest. But I actually think nature-based carbon markets, if we could get them to work better, would probably be one.
Yeah, and you're talking about resilience or risks, about resilience. What do you think? Are there any of you that could identify a resilience risk that would facilitate the market for biocredits? What are the resilience risks that a buyer could that's something that I would like to invest in. Yeah, Martin, do you have?
Yeah, I got a microphone, so
Yeah.
I can try at least to formulate some questions. Thanks a lot, Helen. It was really interesting to hear your presentation. So I really was thinking about something else, really, that I wanted to ask you. And it's all about like the potential now to, as some companies have started to think about, to sort of bundle their products with nature improvements in general, like creating a product. It could be food, it could be renewable energy with some kind of nature improvement. And if you have some comment on what do you think, is that a viable and potential avenue really to explore more when it comes, especially to credits in general, nature credits? Could that be a potential to develop the market, to use that use case really, and to work on that use case for corporates?
Do you mean like, I'm actually thinking of Natura in Brazil, where they've got like a bit of a bioeconomy play going, where they're restoring parts of the Amazon that's producing materials that they're using for their products, and then that's their kind of sales pitch. Do you mean like that?
Yeah, something like that. That could be one example. Another example could be, for example, if you, as an energy producer, actually purchase credits and use that as a biodiversity or nature benefit and build that into your actual product. And the question would be, of course, if the end consumer would be willing to pay an extra penny for that nature improvement. But just interesting to hear your comments on that.
I mean, I'd like to think yes, but we worked with, there's two companies. One was a very large supermarket in the UK. They changed all their packaging, so it wasn't going to be plastic packaging, to compete with a very big competitor, which was Marks and Spencer's, that has a lot of plastic packaging, and they lost market share. Which I thought was just, you obviously didn't have a good enough marketing department, because I would have bought your products, and I'm sure many others would have. The other one is, I don't know if I can say this, but don't show it around, but we heard that Nestle has done a lot of this lens modelling. It was a pioneer with that landscape enterprise network model, and still is, but they are not seeing it translate into consumer uptake. And I think that's just the people vote with their money at the end of the day, and I think that's a bit of a challenge. So I'd love to say yes, but that's not the evidence that's being found at the moment.
Thank you. Any more questions? Yeah, Thomas has a question.
So what you're indicating is that in the end it's the final consumer's choice that will make a difference. I mean, if it's this has to create value, since we are talking about business and the profits, and if there are no, well, what I think that we have been thinking about is the buyers, the primary buyers of the credits is the companies. But for the companies to buy, it has to be value creating in some way. And if their customers, I mean, the general public, don't give a shit about this, in fact, there will be no value creation. So where do we, well...
Where's the value creation? It's in that operational and supply chain resilience. So like Reckitt's invests a lot in supporting plantations in Southeast Asia for rubber because its biggest brand is Durex. So it's got skin in the game. That's why it wants to do that. It's also looking at supporting nature-based solutions around a place in the north of England called the Humber because it's worried about flood affecting its warehousing. And that's why the incredible David Croft can get it, who's the CSO, can get it through the CFO. But I don't know if people will pay more for, I'm trying to make nature-friendly condoms. I have no idea from Durex. I don't know. But that's. I mean, some brands will benefit, like Natura. It's known as a brand that's high integrity. But I think for a Nestlé, I mean, you've got so many different sub-brands. How do you possibly make sure that they're all really high integrity?
Well, with that, we say a warm thank you. You will also receive one of those beautiful birds that were carved and painted with, carved first and then painted with linseed oil by Claes Hovberg from Umeå.
Yes. And he really thought that this one you should have. Because this is a bird, rödhake in Swedish. I don't know the English
robin?
name. Yeah. Because it's quite common in England. So when you heard you were coming from London, he said, I want her to have this one.
That's so meaningful. It's my spirit animal, Robin. I'm just so grateful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So interesting to and so generous of you to share your work and your experiences. So
Thank
we're
you. I hope it's
so
helpful.
happy for that.
Thanks.